So it's my real pleasure to introduce David Brown from Down Under in Australia. And David's going to speak on the subject of strategic planning for national fellowships. Every organization needs to have a long-term understanding of what its purpose is and how it plans to get there. And he's going to give us a simple method for doing just that. David's background was in marketing and strategic planning in London initially, before moving to Hong Kong, where he joined Coca-Cola in marketing and strategic planning roles in South Korea, Singapore, Indonesia, and Australia. So he's incredibly widely traveled and very experienced. While in Australia, he was in an international team developing a strategic plan, which was used in the development of a global information system. And since then, he's run his own strategic planning consultancy, a web development firm, and was CEO for a family law firm. For the past 10 years, David has worked for the Christian Medical and Dental Fellowship of Australia, CMDFA, as Chief Operating Officer. And CMDFA is one of the 80+ member organizations of ICMDA. So David, it's a real pleasure to have you. What time is it there in Australia?
Just coming up to 1:10 in the morning.
Oh, so, goodness.
Well, if my eyes glaze over halfway through, send me a jolt. No, I'm fine. Well,
we're extra grateful for having you then, and look forward to hearing you. So please take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Look, it's a great pleasure talking to you all tonight. As Peter said, this is a method of strategic planning that I learned when we were on this project in Atlanta, developing a basis for an information system globally. I used it then and adapted it for strategic planning for my own business after I left Coca-Cola. And I found it's a very simple way, but a very profound way of really digging into an organization's purpose and its goals and how it goes forward. And I think the key thing is that it gives you a system that actually gives you an outcome of things that you have to do to achieve it. One of the problems with strategic plans is often you spend a lot of time doing them and they're put up on a shelf and never thought of again. So in this plan, it actually takes through to action plans. So let me share my screen now. So strategic planning for 2022. We start off by, first of all, looking at the vision of an organization. This is really the prime reason for an organization's existence. What is it trying to do? What is it trying to achieve in the long term? What is it all about? When I was doing this in strategic planning with companies, we would take, I would generally do morning sessions of about 4 hours, because after that, I found my brain was frying and so was everybody else's if we tried to do a full day. So we'd do about half a day. Often it would take 2 half days to go through an organization, really picking apart the fundamental prime reason for that vision, that organization's existence. You think most people would sort of know that, but really often people go along working day to day, solving today's problems without thinking about what the long-term purpose of the organization and its is. So we start off with a vision, and from the vision we then go to look at what are the high-level goals of an organization? What are the key things that an organization wants to achieve in the long term? Now, I'm going to take you through the one that we developed for CMDFA in Australia. But in an organization, generally we'd find there were 4 types of goals. One was related to how fast they wanted to grow, or how much they wanted to grow. The second one would be related to how much money they wanted to make. The third one would be the kind of culture that they wanted to develop. And the fourth one would be the kind of image that they wanted to present to the world at large. Now, that's not necessarily what our organizations would want, and certainly the ones that we develop for Australia, as you will see, are somewhat different from that. But in a way, they are still, you still have to think about how fast you want to grow, or do you want to grow, or making enough money to keep you viable at least, and then the kind of culture that you want as an organization and the way that you present yourself. So they're still there, but in a different form, I think. So once you go through this, and again, this is a process that if I was doing it with an organization, we would take at least 2 sessions, 2 4-hour sessions to dig through these, and sometimes more, depending upon the organization. Now, this might not be possible for you, given that many of your board probably are very busy doctors and dentists and don't have a lot of time to devote to this. I mean, we did this at CMDFA during our Zoom board meetings. We had a few board meetings to do this, and we managed to get a long way pretty quickly, which was really good, which I think was proof of the fact that people did have a good idea of what they were trying to do and wanting to do. But it can be quite a long process, and if you have the time, then it's very good to try and set out a number of morning sessions. And I say morning because I work better in the mornings than the afternoons. My brain's a bit sharper, to really think through these things and to draw in all of the participants' viewpoints and discussions about where you go with these. It's really important that you do have an opportunity for everybody to consider these, and everybody to put in their views and discussion and talk through the various things. It also helps if you have somebody who can sit outside the organization to probe your thinking. I mean, this is when I was working with the companies, this is the role I took, was really pushing them, asking questions, probing them, continue to make sure they were thinking these things through. And, you know, in fact, I quite liked actually making people think. I thought that was quite good. But it is a process that does require a fair bit of thought and a fair bit of time. So once you've identified the vision and you've identified the key high-level goals, we then come to look at the critical success factors. Now, these are the things that an organization has to achieve, has to do successfully in order to achieve the goals. When I was doing this with Coca-Cola, we then assigned those critical success factors to the various goals. When we were doing that in Australia, as you'll see, we haven't done that. And the reason for that is, I think in a way it's a bit simplistic, because many of the critical success factors relate to a number of the goals. They don't necessarily just relate to one goal, they relate to a number of them. And so by trying to assign it to a goal, I think is a bit too pedantic, if I can put it that way. One of the reasons that we did it when we were doing it for Coke was we were trying to identify what were the most important goals by the number of critical success factors that underpin them. Again, I think that's a little bit too pedantic, and I think it's better to look at this in a more holistic manner. So this is where we used to get to. Now, the one thing that I've added to it on my own initiative is to add action plans to it. And where we go with this is to say, okay, if you've got a critical success factor, then let's have a look at that and decide what you have to do to achieve that and who has to do it. So you can actually put people's names and times against when those things are going to be done. So that really takes the whole plan from the really big picture down to specific things that people have to do. So the strategic plan then becomes really an operational plan, an action plan. I did this with a number of companies, small companies in Australia, and it really worked. It really gave them something to focus on and people that were accountable for achieving those things. And that made a huge difference in terms of turning that strategic plan into something that actually made a difference from day to day, if I could put it that way. So that's the model, that's the schematic, if I can put it that way. Let's have a look at where we went through with CMDFA. Now, our primary vision that we had was transformed by Christ and transforming healthcare. So, as you can see, it was related to something that was related to each person, and it also related to what we wanted to do as an organization, transforming healthcare in terms of the way that our members acted, in the way that we presented ourselves, in the way that we took positions on things. The board felt that they wanted to express that and spread that, take that out a bit. And so that was then further expressed as being a strong Christian presence in healthcare and also in the wider community, providing fellowship, community, networking, and support so the members can integrate their faith and practice both individually and collectively. Now, the interesting thing about that is that it starts to say that we're not only a fellowship that's looking inwards, but it's also looking outwards, that we're being a strong Christian presence both in healthcare and also the wider community. Now, as you'll see, that's a bit different from my model, but I think the great thing about this way of handling strategic planning is that it is very flexible, that you should be able to add things or adapt it to your particular needs and particularly what you want to do. So this was what we saw as our vision. We then went through and identified a number of goals. These aren't in any particular order. To promote Christian ethical and evidence-based healthcare practice, very fundamental to a Christian medical fellowship, of course. The next one is to encourage our members to integrate faith and practice, which was something that was fundamental to CMDFA right at the beginning. The next one was to promote self-sacrificial service, both within and outside Australia. And what we saw, this was really fulfilling what we wanted to do, encouraging our members to go into the mission field, not necessarily outside of Australia, but or as well as outside, but both within Australia as well. We felt that this was another important factor that we wanted to promote. And we, as I'm sure your organizations do, have a number of people who are serving in the mission field. And this is something that we wanted to promote and develop. And I'll get to that later. And then to promote sharing of faith both within and outside Australia. And then the next one, to ensure the stability and sustainability of the organization. Now, this is one that relates to the fact that we've got to make sure that we've got enough funds to run the organization, and also to make sure that we've got enough funds to grow the organization. So it was, that is the sort of, like you say with a company, it would be how much you grow and how much money you make. That's contained within that one goal, okay? So we've identified the 5, for our organization, what we saw as the 5 high-level goals. And then we came to the critical success factors. I've broken these up so I can talk you through as we go. It's not necessarily that they're related to that specific goal, but we had pastoral care, Luke's Journal. Now, Luke's Journal is a publication that CMDFA has been publishing for over 20 years, and we've now taken that online. So it's not just, we do a print version of a few for a few people who want one, but basically it's gone online, which has been a fantastic step forward because it's enabled us to really use the fantastic articles that we've got, both for current and in the past, to get out to a wider audience. Fellowship, of course, prayer meetings. We, for example, run a weekly prayer meeting on a Friday night. We started it when the COVID started, and we've continued them on. And Peter's actually joining us tomorrow night, so it's his morning, our night. And targeted communication. When I talk about targeted communication, we've actually moved into using Facebook, social media, to target our communication to Christian audiences with messages that we have about the stands that we're taking on issues like abortion, gender dysphoria, euthanasia, and also specific articles that we're taking from our online version of Luke's Journal to get people interested. And we're using that to build up a Friends of CMDFA group who are not necessarily members as yet, but who we can then continue to communicate with in a similar way that I think the UK does. The next lot is the say line. Of course, say line is something that we do a lot of in Australia. We find that really useful. Ethics policies, of course. I mean, this has been something that's taken up a lot of our time and attention over the last 2 to 3 years, as our state governments have been introducing policies of allowing euthanasia and abortion, and also doing outlawing conversion practices, which has been very difficult about gender dysphoria. While we're taking positions on advocacy, as you'll see the next one, we are trying to make sure that we're non-partisan. We don't want to get identified with one particular political party or the other. Although it tends to be one party that pushes these policies, we don't want to be seen as supporting the other party. We want to be seen as issue-oriented, not politically oriented, and also export opinions. I mean, we have obviously a great depth of experts within our fellowship, and of course we want to encourage them to use their expertise in getting those opinions across in the relevant manner, in the relevant people. We're looking at building alliances. One of the things that we're trying to do is we're developing alliances with the major denominations, although we are definitely non-denominational, but we want to build alliances with those people so that we can use them to get some of our message out. Regs, that's our recent graduates. We have somebody who represents them, and he's doing a great job. And our students, we run student conferences, and we have student reps seeking to develop student fellowships in all the major medical colleges. We obviously want to grow our membership and revenue. And also we have state fellowships where our state organizations run fellowship groups. It's been interesting over the COVID period, if I can digress for a moment, to say that we obviously haven't been able to have in-person fellowship meetings, but so we have been using Zoom. Now, what's been interesting is that in Australia, this country is huge, and the population centres tend to be down the East Coast and tend to be very capital city centric. But we do have a number of our members out in our regional and rural areas. With us going to Zoom, it's actually meant that we've able to spread our fellowship meetings across into our rural and regional areas more, which has been really encouraging. And it's something that we don't want to give up as we're moving back to in-person things. And the last one is to provide encourage mission support. So it's not just encouraging people to go out in the mission field, it's also encouraging people to support missions. ICMDA, of course, we're obviously trying to link in with you as much as we can, and we're also multi-denominational. I don't know what it's like with the other fellowship groups around the world. We don't, when people want to join CMDFA, we have a very simple statement of faith that's very broad, but very, very simple. We don't ask what denominations people are when they come to join, but we do find out as we go forward. At least I tend to be in my particular position, because I'm across the whole country and I try and get to know as many of our members as I can, that we have a wide range. I mean, we have members from Catholic Church, from the Baptists, from the Catholic, the Anglicans, from Pentecostal churches, from Hillsong, right across the board. Although mainly our members, I would say, would be evangelical, but we have a wide range, and that's very good. So we get quite a range of views as we go forward with things. So that gives you an idea of where we got to with CMDFA. We've now got to work out, we've still got a lot to do, but what's been encouraging is that once we've identified the goals, our board members have taken on one of the goals each to try and develop. So we're now empowering those board members to develop their critical success factors, their action plans to achieve the goals that they've taken on. And every board meeting, we're asking for an update on what they've done and how they're progressing with it. And of course, if they want help, we'll give it to them. But so we've got a strategic plan that is, I believe, is going to be very, very effective in the long term in developing up these high-level goals. So that pretty well brings me to the end, apart from just running through again the definitions. So the vision, what is the prime reason for the organization's existence? The goals, what are the high-level goals of the organization? The critical success factors, what does the organization have to achieve to fulfill its goals? And the action plans to turn the strategy into execution. Okay. So that brings me to the end. It's, as I say, it's a simple model, but it's very profound. It's very clever in the way that it really digs into the core of an organization and gets people to really think about and spell out what it is they're trying to achieve, what it is we want our organization to achieve, and how we want to achieve it in the long term. So thank you very much. Over to you, Peter, and time for questions.
Thanks very much, David. We've been listening to David Brown, from the Chief Operating Officer from CMDFA, Christian Medical and Dental Fellowship of Australia, which is one of ICMDA's over 80 member bodies, talking about the whole issue of strategic planning for national fellowships. Now, we are going to go into a time of question and answer now. Now, I'm sure that we've got many people today who are involved in leadership in their national movements around the world. And it's very interesting at ICMDA seeing the incredible range of movements we've got. So that one end, we have groups like the CMDA of the US, of CMF in the UK, CMAI in India, which are huge groups with lots of paid staff, big budgets, and lots of activities. And they've been going for many decades. And then at the end, we've got some very new young movements that might only have 15 or 20 members from a whole country and rely entirely on volunteers, and every stage you can imagine in between. So what may be right for one organization will not necessarily be appropriate at its time and development for another. But David's given us a really helpful overall format for looking at vision, goals, critical success factors, and action plans, and illustrated it really well from CMDFA's experience. So David, our first question today comes from Jean Rudd from CMDA US. And Jean is asking, do you attempt to define organizational core values as part of your strategic planning? You talked a little bit about ethics, but or ethics policies, but what about core values for the organization?
Well, we haven't, and this model doesn't, but I think the core values, I think, are reflected in the high level goals. Because if you've got a, yeah, I mean, I think that's where I would come out saying that, but we haven't identified them specifically and separately, but rather integrated what we see as our core values into the goals that we've set.
And another question, follow-up question from Jean. Could you explain a little bit more the difference between the vision of an organization and its mission? Do you use the term mission or
well, look, that's a good question, Jean. And oh, hi, by the way, I think we met about 10 years ago when you were in Australia, but when I was very new in the organization. Yeah, look, I think the vision is, if I can put it this way, is where you want to go, and the mission is perhaps how you get there. But I think the two are sort of, in some sense, interchangeable. You know, there is there is sort of an interchange between the two, if I can put it that way, you know.
Thank you. It's interesting, in ICMDA, of course, we're not a national movement, but we're here to serve all the national movements. Yes. And so our vision and mission are slightly different from a national movements would be, but the vision of ICMDA is a Christian witness through doctors and dentists in every community and in every nation. So if you like, that's what we're hoping to achieve. That's our grandiose vision of where we'd like to be. And our mission is starting and strengthening national movements of Christian doctors and dentists. So as you were saying, one is where you want to be, the other is how you get there. We've got a question now from David Nichols, who's saying, you know, how often do you go through this process, David? Is this a 3-year, 5-year cycle? Is it a once for always? What would you suggest to a group embarking on this strategic planning process?
Well, it's a very good question. We did a strategic plan for CMDFA about 5 years ago, not using this model. And then, so this was about a 5-year term between the two strategic plans. It really depends upon what is happening with the organization and when you need to do it. But for example, I did a strategic plan with a family law firm, and then about 3 or 4 years later, they came back to me and said, can you come back and do it again? Because then we've tripled in size, which is a bit of a sad reflection on the amount of family law that goes on in Australia. So, you know, they felt that they had used the plan to grow, and then they needed to go back in about 3 or 4 years. So it really is up to you in terms of how you see what's changed in the organization, how you've gone in terms of achieving the goals. Perhaps as you've gone through it, you've identified new goals or new things have emerged that require you to take a different tack. So I think it's really up to the leaders of the organization to sort of assess where you are and how you're going. But I would say generally 3 years, perhaps 5 years, just depends upon how swiftly things are changing.
Thank you. From Angel Wang now, who's from Taiwan originally, but based in Burkina Faso in Francophone West Africa. Mm-hmm. And she's saying, how do we deal with more than one national organization in a country, or perhaps also different parties or views within the same national organization? Have you had that? And without getting into specifics, have you had that challenge of disagreement in Australia, or has it been pretty much of one mind coming together on these things?
Pretty much of one mind, I think. But I think I mean, when I was at Coca-Cola and we did it with Coke, I mean, we had a lot of pretty heated discussion at times about what the goals were and what the critical success factors were. And I think it's just a matter of trying to talk it through, and trying to understand what everybody's point of view is and trying to incorporate that into the model. The model's very flexible. So you can use it, and if you want to have perhaps different sections of the organization taking on different goals, I suppose you could do that, providing they're not counterproductive, providing they don't cancel each other out. I mean, I think you just have to try and talk it through and adapt it to whatever situation you find.
I was fascinated to hear your description of how long it took to decide on the vision and high-level goals. And I know when we did this with ICMDA, it was, I think, about 8 to 12 years ago. And I remember it taking a very long time, but it being really worth it in the end to crystallize things. You talked about a 4-hour session or even 2 4-hour sessions to refine the vision, and then the same for the high-level goals as well. Can you just talk us through a bit how those sessions worked out? I mean, how did you encourage the discussion? There must have been lots of different, perhaps even competing ideas of what the vision or goal should be. How did you manage the discussion and focus it down onto something that at the end everyone was happy with and could agree on?
Yeah, good question. Now to think back, I think one of the things I do is I try to encourage them to talk, right? To try and encourage people to give out what they think and what they say. And then I would sort of pick up on what one person said and another person said, and try and then ask them to perhaps reconcile those views, and then try and push them a bit further about what they meant and the deeper meaning of it. So you're a provocateur. You're trying to push people to think through what they're saying and questioning what they think and questioning what they say against what other people say, not in an antagonistic way, but a challenging way to try and encourage thought and encourage discussion. And also, I think the important thing with the vision I found was that to be intuitive, to try to understand where people are going, and perhaps seeing something that they haven't seen and putting that to them, so it challenges them to think in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so how important do you think it is to have someone who's, perhaps not on the board or the leadership team as a catalyst to this whole process?
I think it is better. Now, I had to do it within CMDFA as being the operating officer with our board, but the fact that I was a non-medical person somehow helped, because I had some separation from them in that sense and had a different viewpoint. But I think it's good to have somebody, if you can, from outside the organization, because they do have a different viewpoint, they do have a different perspective, and it can help challenge the people themselves to think through things. As a facilitator, yeah.
How much difference did the strategic planning make to CMDFA? I mean, can you give us a sketch of perhaps what the organization was like beforehand and how it changed afterwards as a result of the strategic planning process?
Well, it hasn't really changed, Peter. We've only just finished this plan in the last quarter of last year. Yeah. So there hasn't been a change in terms of that I could say. But what we have got now is a very clear set of defined goals. And we have got board members who've adopted those goals to take on and work with. which is terrific. I find terrific because we've got an engagement from the board at a level that I don't think we've had before, frankly. So that the board members do have an active role in actually trying to achieve some of those goals, or in encouraging the movement towards them, you know. So I think in the long term it will, but it's, you know, we're a few months out. So it hasn't made any great strategic difference as yet. But it has focused us better than we were before. When we, with the strategic plan we did 5 or 6 years before, the people that were doing it got a group of our members together, our board and other key members, and said, what do you think we should be doing, you know? And that was the model they developed. What this is going is from a top-down perspective. It's different, you know. And it was interesting because one of the key things that came out of the first plan was that mentoring was some of the key thing that people wanted to do. But when we actually tried to implement it, we couldn't get people to actually do it, to be mentors, you know. We couldn't get other people to so it's all, unfortunately, it didn't achieve what we wanted it to do. So, and it was, in a way, it was an action-oriented plan, but it wasn't, it didn't have any other structure than that, in a way. So we'll just have to see how this goes through. I mean, our organization is in transition in terms of its focus, if I can put it that way. We were, I think, much more internally focused as a fellowship. Now we're taking that fellowship. We still want to obviously retain our fellowship for our members, which is really, really important. But now we're seeing our reason for being in terms of what we're taking out to the public and to the legislators in terms of our advocacy areas, and what we're taking out in terms of our mission action and how we're supporting missions and encouraging people to go on missions. So we're in the transition from being an internally focused fellowship to a more externally focused organization as well, while we're retaining that fellowship, you know.
And that's great to see. It really resonates with the biblical model of fellowship, which is about meeting together in order to stir one another up to love and good works. And so we come together in order to make a real positive impact in the world. And that comes back to your overall goal, doesn't it, of transformed by Christ, and therefore transforming healthcare. And it was very striking in your presentation, as you mentioned, the advocacy, being a voice for the voiceless, the mission, serving the poor and marginalized, both there and abroad, being witnesses to Christ in the consultation, integrating faith and practice, very outward looking. Now, next question, Artyom Adamenko. Artyom's the leader of the national movement in Belarus, in Eurasia. And he's saying strategic planning is most often the responsibility of the national leadership team. And that's certainly as you've outlined it. What's the best way to pass the vision, goals, and critical success factors on to everyone in the organization, not just so that everyone knows them, but actually buys into them and is running with them as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We're in the process of doing that at the moment, and we haven't achieved it yet. We have usually annually what we call an Equip and Connect meeting, when we draw together all our state chairs and the number of the key leaders in the organization who may not, key players. And we're planning one of those in May, when we will present the plan to them and get their feedback on it. So it's that's the way we would do it, through that meeting, through the state organizations, who would then hopefully pass it on to their committee and their members as they go forward. I think if you can do it in person in some way, it's more effective than just doing it online or, on paper.
Yes, but you talked about targeted communication too, and I guess the importance of, and social media, the importance of just getting the message out there again and again and again till everyone gets it. You can't assume that people have on the first hearing.
No, that's very true. Yeah. Yeah.
Michael Harper is asking, how often do you draw trustees together so that their individual activities remain coherent within the overarching vision and with one another?
Well,
and is your trustees, are they really the ones who direct things, or is it staff, or is it some kind of action team? How do you?
Well, we in terms of our employed staff, there's only me 3 days a week and Marilyn, who's our office manager, if you like, who 5 days a week. So there's like 1 2/3 of a person, and we report to a board of 8, and the board meets 4 times a year, and that is so it's a combination of the employed staff working with the board in terms of moving things along and taking actions, and we're moving more towards a governance board rather than an operational board, but it's a mixture of those two things. And of course, in one sense, we're perhaps getting more operational with the board in terms of taking on the goals, but we'll see how that develops.
And I guess there's a change, isn't there, as an organization grows, because in the larger movements within ICMDA, the board's function is pretty much governance, overseeing, and holding the CEO or leader accountable and agreeing the strategic plan and budget, and letting the staff get on with it. But of course, if you haven't got many staff and if you're all volunteers, then the members of the board will often be key volunteers in terms of taking things forward as well.
Yes.
We've got follow-up question from Michael Harper. How much autonomy do the individual trustees have if they're each being allocated to one part of the work? How much do they have? And perhaps related to that, do you have away days for trustees to refresh the vision and direction?
Well, they have a fair bit of autonomy. I mean, they report back to the board at our board meetings. So, but they have a fair bit of autonomy. But we have a system where there's a lot of email communication, and also we do have an executive, which is the chair, the secretary, the treasurer, and myself. So we have communications on certain levels as well. But in terms of if one of the board members has got an idea of what they're trying to do, they would possibly feed it out to the board through email, and we'll have an email discussion about it as well. I mean, we haven't met together now for 2 years because of COVID, so we've been doing Zoom meetings, and we actually had one Zoom meeting which was just for fellowship, because the one thing we missed was just talking to each other, and saying, what have you been doing? Because if you go into a Zoom meeting on a board, we found that trying to do it longer than 4 hours, is just too draining. So we tend to keep the Zoom meetings very much focused on the business of the day. And so we actually had a Zoom meeting where we just sat around and chatted and prayed together, and that was terrific. So it's a combination, but we're using the sort of email and Zoom as we go forward, and again, this is new for us in terms of taking a board member taking a goal on. So we're somewhat working through the process as we do it. It's there aren't any very tight guidelines laid down. We're just working together as a fellowship, working together and seeing how we can work it out.
It's so important, the fellowship element, isn't it? And I think
it
that's
is.
what we
Yes.
all miss with Zoom is that
Yes.
it's not like going to a meeting and then you have lots of little chats over coffee, one-to-one beforehand, and then you might sit down for a meal with someone and ask about their family and what challenges they're facing. And it's hard to go straight into a meeting and then not have that
Yes.
over a long period of time. We've
Yeah.
got a question here from Christian Stakov, who's saying, thanks for this very informative talk. Could you please share your opinion on the SMART goals model? So the SMART model is it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, or something like that, isn't it? And people use these for evaluating goals. But what's your opinion on SMART? Do you use it?
It's not something I'm familiar with, really. But I suppose it would be encompassed in the model I put forward by the way that we're taking our critical success factors down to our action plans, I would say. But look, I can't really comment because it's not a model I'm familiar with. So, I don't really know.
No worries. Another question from Angel Wang in West Africa. How do we action passing on our national senior leadership to young leadership? So this whole question of succession planning and thinking about grooming and developing, mentoring the leaders of the next generation. Any wisdom from your own experience about that?
Well, that's a really difficult one. In terms of we on one level, we run a vision conference every year in January with people we pick out as student leaders that we invite to come along. Everybody enjoys the conference. It hasn't been, and a lot of the people that are on the board and active come from those, but it's only a small number. We find it very difficult, frankly, to find people who are willing to serve on the board and give us time because of the incredible work pressures that our members have on them, So we try to identify people that can come on the board that we can see as developing for the future. But it's hard, and we don't always succeed in the way that we would like to in terms of doing that. We had a situation about 3 years ago where our chairman had to stand down, and John Whitehall, who you've met, Peter, stood up and said, because I'd asked him to pray about what we needed, and he said, well, look, if you're stuck, I'll be chair. So he came on board as chair. He is stood down now, and another of our board members has taken up the chairmanship. So that's good because she's been on the board quite a few years and knows how we operate. So that's what we try to do. We try and get people onto the board and then groom them over a number of years where they can take a leadership position. But it is really hard, to get good people who are willing to spend the time, and I understand why, but it's not easy. I'm sure you find the same, Peter, don't you?
Well, they say if you want a job done, ask a busy person, because often they are the ones who are good at making time and prioritizing for it.
Yeah.
But yes, and I think this is a challenge that our national movements all over the world face, because most of them don't have paid staff, and so they're relying entirely on volunteers. And all of those volunteers are busy doctors or dentists or students who already have more than a full-time job.
Yes.
And then they've got the balance of church and family and other recreation, other things as well.
Yes.
And so it can be a challenge to make most of those things. We try to focus on, what's the one thing you do really well, or that God's really laid on your heart, or what's the thing you can do that no one else can do. Do what only you can do, and no one else can. And like in the body of Christ, we specialize and decide on what our own personalities, backgrounds, and gifts prepares us in terms of a role to play within our national movement, I guess.
Yes, yeah, I think so. We, as I say, we've got myself 3 days and Marilyn 5. We're actually coming to a situation where we're both planning to retire this year. So we're now struggling with the Marilyn's planning to retire in June, and was originally going to be June, and I've extended it to October at the moment, so that we separate it. But it's going to be an interesting. Marilyn's been with us 21 years, and I've been 10 years. So,
yeah,
we've got to handle that transition very carefully.
It's a challenging time of transition. Maybe just one last question, just on how do you evaluate progress on this? You put your strategic plan together. You're starting to put it into action. How are you going to evaluate it going forward to make sure?
Well, I think it's a matter of assessing as we go as how we're achieving the goals and what we've done to achieve the goals, what programs are in place, how they're progressing, how successful they are, or how they're not progressing, etc., etc. So we would plan to do it through our board meetings and talking about what people are doing and how they're achieving it, and not through a pedantic assessment, but more by discussing it with each other. I mean, the thing that we have to, what I find is interesting is that, we're a fellowship, we're not a company, and therefore I think we have to operate as a fellowship in the way that we deal with each other, in the way that we talk to each other, in the way that we evaluate what we're all doing, and bearing in mind that as you say, that the people that we have on the board and that are doing things have also extremely busy lives. So we have to be patient with each other and have to give each other space to not do things at times as well. That doesn't account for me. I have to do things because they pay me, but for the other people, you have to give them some space, and deal with them gently and kindly.
Thanks very much. And perhaps that's a great note to finish on. We've been listening to David Brown, the Chief Operating Officer from Christian Medical and Dental Fellowship of Australia, speaking to us on strategic planning for national fellowships and the 4 principles of being clear on your vision, identifying your goals, sorting out your critical success factors, and then action plans to make them happen, and then good oversight and evaluation. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us. And we wish you all the best going forward, particularly for the time of transition that's coming up as well. So it just remains to me really again to say thank you, David, for your time and expertise.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for everybody that attended.
And we look forward to seeing you again soon on ICMDA webinars. May the Lord bless you.
Thank you.